Hello, World Civ Class 106. Welcome to week 4. And so at this point, I want to say that I think most of you are on board with the expectations for what we do each week work-wise. So keep making sure that you contact me if there's any questions or issues about anything, please. For those of you who are interested, since we just covered Egypt and the topic of Christianity in Egypt, I just thought I would recommend a book. I bought this in Leiden, Netherlands, at a very interesting bookstore, Christianizing Egypt. And this is really from a very scholarly work, Princeton Press. And it's religious studies, an author in religious studies. I will say that it's a little dense and full of jargon, and it's a little disappointing for those of us who maybe are not familiar with a lot of religious studies lingo, if you will. But the subject matter, I don't know of any other book like it. At least I haven't been exposed to one like this. So if you're wanting to understand the transition of ancient Egyptian religion and Egypt's perhaps slower than understood evolution in terms of popular culture into Christianity prior to the rise of Islam in Egypt, this is an interesting book. And so I just thought I would recommend that. And what else? Oh yeah, so I just wanted to point out again that I saw a lot of you still kind of addressing what was in the Coptic church video as historic fact. And what I was trying to point out is I was mainly, as I put in the notes, exposing you to the fact that there is a very thriving, even though it's a minority church within Egypt, Coptic Egyptian church. And that what is stated in that clip would be a fact according to church tradition, but for secular historians regarding Mark converting Egypt and all of that, it'd be more or less much more debatable. That's all I'm saying. So, having said that, now this week we're covering ancient Israel, and I wanted to put out this announcement earlier because as soon as you start watching this, some of you are going to have a really hard time with this section more than the one that I covered, evolution and natural selection. I grew up in a very, very religious household, and my own beliefs are something that I don't try to put into my classroom. I've had my own, I have my own thoughts on the broader topic of spirituality and all of that. But I am very aware of I grew up in a very what you would call conservative Christian worldview, and my great grandfather was a Baptist minister. My grandfather was a member of the Christian Coalition and a Gideon, and then on my father's side, most of the family are not religious Catholic anymore. But I do have a great uncle that was a Catholic priest, and some aunts and great aunts that were nuns. So what I'm just trying to say is I'm aware of deep sentimentalness and sensitivity to the topic of Christianity because that's a tradition that I grew up around, right? And for a believer who grows up in what people would call a fundamentalist household, where you look at the Bible as a literal history. So it's not just spiritual truth, it is historic fact. Adam and Eve really existed as two actual people, a man and a woman that started all of humanity. The flood really happened, and all of humanity comes out of the Noah's Ark family, and so forth. And secular historians don't approach things that way. And actually, what I wanted to point out, there are many, many religious clergy, although they don't usually address this in their church sermons, that don't necessarily believe in the actual history of the Bible, but they still believe it's God inspired and there's a message that has some sort of spiritual truth. I'm not promoting or demoting any of those. I'm merely pointing out that this section can feel like an attack on someone's faith, and that's not the whole point of it. And each individual will decide if they are a believer of this particular set of faith group possibilities. I'm at a loss of words right now. So the bottom line is, my name is Joshua, and for example, we have the book of Joshua, which you're going to see is actually called into question by historians as actually being literal history that is verifiable. And they have their list of reasons, and I have a discussion of that. I just want to say one thing to keep in mind. It used to be that early on in the 19th century, there was a lot of skepticism from secular historians about whether or not ancient Assyria existed in Nineveh. And it was discovered in Iraq. And that was a case where the biblical skeptics of history were discredited, and the Bible stood the test of time in proving that self to be true history. So it's not an agenda in which it's always one-sided. And so, there's not a conspiracy in terms of the overall broad picture of historians on the historicity of the Bible. You do have individuals that have an agenda to try to go out and discredit many different kind of faiths. And so what I'm trying to point out to you is that that's not what's going on here. And again, as you participate in this, you're not it's not assumed that you are believing this over maybe something that you believe personally. You are learning what secular historians and archaeologists conclude, and scholars of Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, and why they make a consensus view on whether or not ancient Israel's history correlates perfectly with what is written in the Bible. Okay, so that's what I want to make clear. And if there's any questions on this, or you have any problems, I want you to please feel free to communicate with me, and I will gladly just talk this over with you. Which also leads me to say this, and I'll be going soon. Now, I'm up here at my friends in Portland, and that's where I'm going to be settling. But I am going to be coming to California next week. I will be in the 209. So I'm hoping to work out a chance to maybe go to MJC and go into the cafeteria or somewhere and have open office hours for anybody who wants to meet me in person. So if you're interested in that, feel free to also just write me on that, and then we can arrange that hopefully for next week. It's going to be a whirlwind tour through the Central Valley. I'm going to see my mom and my niece and nephew and some other friends and so forth. But anyhow, I want to try to make myself available to my class. And that's enough of this. I hope you're having a great week, and we'll be in touch.